So I actually wanted to start by talking about your book, which I read and is amazing.
Oh, thank you.
I know Tom Hanks, in a way, provided the kind of early inspiration.
Kind of nudged us. People would ask me from the publishing world, what, did I ever think I would do an autobiography or memoir? And I always said, no, don't think so. But I asked Tom one day, and he said, well, if you ever do it, focus on your childhood. That's what everybody's most curious about. When our dad passed away, Rance, Clint and I were spending time sort of clearing out the house and preparing for this memorial service that we were gonna, stage on Dad's behalf, and telling a lot of stories and having a lot of laughs and shedding a few tears, and I said, here's what Tom has always said. Do a book about the childhood. I don't want to do that by myself, but I wouldn't mind doing it with you. And you know what? It would be a chance to share a lot of these stories and feelings and the uniqueness of our family. Mom and Dad were, they were immigrants. I mean, they're examples of that kind of American dream, of no inside track into show business, but a tremendous passion. And they were of a generation just right after the war that had that kind of confidence and enough resources to just, by God, take a shot at it, whether their family wanted them to or not. And and they did, and they changed the course of the family. I wouldn't have been that kind of pioneer.
They were the dreamers from Oklahoma that decided they were going to give show business a shot. And I would have given them no chance. I mean, my dad was a hick, and my mom came from a small town, and these people just don't make it in show business. I wouldn't have bet on them at all. But they had the intestinal fortitude.
Your mom, it seemed like, really dedicated her life to making her kids and her husband as big of a success as possible. What was it that you did that makes you regret how you handled things with her?
Well, in retrospect, my mom probably had OCD, some version of OCD, and some anxiety disorders. She had some health issues. She smoked, even though Dad was constantly trying to get her to quit smoking. And she ultimately did, but not until she had emphysema.
And that bothered you that she didn't quit?
It bothered me. My dad had incredible self-discipline, and I felt like she wasn't taking care of her health. And I disrespected that. I disrespected some of her eccentricities, and growing up in that household, I loved her. She was amazing, but I'd also tease her as I became a teenager and be dismissive, and it wasn't until later, as I started to have kids myself, and as I began to see her deal with even more serious illness, and I could see what a warrior she was. And I would have these kinds of conversations with my dad where I would begin to recognize how profoundly she had influenced the course of his life, and therefore our lives, in her belief in what a career in this business could be like, and her excitement around that. I had misunderstood her. I had underestimated her, and I think I told her, but not enough. And then she was gone. In doing the audio version of the book, I really kind of almost broke down a couple of times talking about her in reading the passages that I'd written about her.
I was going to say, I can even now see it like touches you thinking about it.
Well, I have so few regrets in my life, and to feel that in some way you didn't communicate to your mother everything she meant, It does hit me. It hits me hard.
Ron said he regrets the way he treated her at times. What do you think of that?
I think he's right, and I think I'm guilty of that too.
How so?
I think we kind of jumped on the pick on mom bandwagon, and I certainly cherish mom more than I did when she was around. You know, we didn't do anything nasty, but my God, she was such a dynamo. And I think that she realized we realized that, but I wish we would have done it more.
And what makes you say you cherish her more?
Well, boy, Graham, this is going to get kind of hard. What she did for Dad, she was really Dad's rock. The last thing she was articulating to us when she passed was about her husband.
Oh, that was beautiful. That was amazing. So, you know, she's in the hospital for the last time. She was trying to say something, and so we got her a yellow pad and a pencil. It took her a long time to write this, very weak, but she was writing, and finally I could see that she'd written Rance, my dad's name. Then she wrote, loves to act. And that's what she wrote. That's what she wanted to tell me. And I told it to Cheryl, and she says, she wants to make sure you take care of your dad. That's what that's what she cares about. So cast your father whenever you can. Of course, which I always happily did.
You wrote about your dad. Here he was in his first full year of living and working in California, expecting to at last fulfill a dream deferred by the Korean War, and then some good fortune broke his way. But it wasn't in the form of a bonanza of work for him, but for his little kid, of all people. Maybe that turned into his superpower in terms of being your acting coach.
I mean, it was basic actor studio stuff. It was Stanislavski, but distilled and presented in a way that I, at 4 and 5 and 6 years old, and Clint even earlier, 2, 3, 4, we could understand it and participate in a process. And it was all about logic. It was all about really understanding the scene, understanding what the character's thinking. I mean, it was basic stuff, but it's not something that kids are often empowered with. Because kids are often prompted to just sort of perform, to sort of make a face, make a sound, act like you're crying, we'll paint some tears on. So his thing would be, he would, before I could read, he would read it, and we would start learning the lines, and line by line, he would say, see, here's the situation. Now, Opie doesn't want to do his homework. And of course, his dad wants him to do his homework, but Opie's trying to explain why he doesn't have to do his homework, or whatever the scene might be. So when he says this line, oh, Pa, I don't think that's really very important. You know, he's just trying to get his dad to stop pressuring him. You know, so you just break it down in the most granular way, to the point where sometimes there'd be a scene in the Andy Griffith show where Opie was getting away with something. I sort of remember asking him, geez, would that work for me? And my dad very quickly said, no, this is a scene in a TV show, and in real life you would not get away with that. So don't even try it.
Dad's special gift was he wasn't intimidated by anybody or any situation. He was with Andy Griffith and Don Knotts and Aaron Rubin and Sheldon Leonard and these very powerful people in show business, and yet Dad was the guy that would raise his hand and say, you know, excuse me, I don't think this is going in the right direction. I think that you're writing Opie to be too bratty. And, listen, I think that might get you guys laughs, but I believe if you have a really good, honest relationship between Opie and his father, that it will play better. And, you know, my God, for a 30-year-old guy from Oklahoma to stand up, just when he gets his foot in the door in show business, he's putting himself in a position to get kicked right in the chestnuts, you know? And yet he did it in a way to where Andy listened and Sheldon listened, and they came back and they said, you know, you're right, Rance. You're right. Let's try to make it, you know, more of an honest relationship. Boy, didn't that set up the show well. Didn't that decision to not make Opie a little jerk work out really, really well for the Andy Griffith Show? That's pop.
I want to take you to, if I could, a moment where after the Andy Griffith show's wrapped, you're 14. Mm-hmm. It's a wrap party. Mm-hmm. And Andy gets on the mic and says he wants to say something.
All right.
Take it from there.
We didn't really have big rap parties at the end of each season, but this was different. We were the #1 show in television, and yet Andy wanted to move on. And that's what was going to happen. And I was okay with it. You know, I wasn't like all year tormented by this. I was really interested in sports, already beginning to think about directing. Loved going back to regular school, even though there were always some challenges there. But when it hit on that last day of shooting, and then we went to the wrap party, that this was it for the Andy Griffith Show. And Andy was up there on the microphone talking. I just started sobbing. I realized I was leaving something behind that was, you know, more than a job. It was a way of life. It was a big part of my life. These people were like family. And I was gonna miss them terribly. And I suddenly didn't know what it was gonna be like to not have that show in my future and those people in my future. Almost 20 years later, we did a reunion movie of the week. And I was asked to come back and be grown-up Opie, and I was directing by then. I'd left Happy Days. I was busy, but Andy asked if I would do it, and I said I would do it. And my sense of who they were as kind of wonderful people and how lucky I was to know them and to be working with them was completely unspoiled by my experience with them 20 years later. It was just great that I could realize that those childhood memories were accurate.
How much did you get picked on growing up?
Well, I got picked on a lot at school. And every time I would come back to public school, it would be kind of an issue. You know, as a little kid, it's just teasing and people staring and asking a lot of questions and laughing about me and giggling and things like that. That was to the point where I wasn't sure I wanted to go back to public school anymore. But by the time I'd adjusted to it, then the next year, when the next year rolled around, I wanted to go back to Stevenson Elementary School in Burbank, California. And I never questioned whether I wanted to stay in the Burbank system from that point forward. But, you know, it got to the point where, you know, I was having to basically know that I was going to have a week or so of wrestling matches and fistfights. And
that affected you how?
Well, I was willing to face it, but I don't think I ever really felt safe and comfortable almost anywhere other than a movie or movie or TV soundstage. I mean, or my home, you know, and so I think that really shaped my personality.
Tell about peeing your pants.
Oh, well, in elementary school, you know, I was so anxious that I didn't really want to go into the boys' lavatory. It wasn't about seeing body parts or anything. It was just like I felt vulnerable in there, and I was just kind of a little embarrassed. And I kept trying to hold it. And one day I just couldn't make it, and I just literally, my bladder just emptied there, you know, with like 4 minutes left in the school day. And of course that was a big laugh, and I was so embarrassed and emotional coming out of there. accidents happen to kids and they get emotional. But for me, with sort of this kind of Opie taunting and just, I just didn't want to be the butt of a joke. Nobody does. And I had a lot of that. Later in high school, I didn't have so much of that.
What was it about what Paul McCartney said to you that impacted how you viewed speaking about being a child star?
Yeah, it was really interesting because I'd interviewed Sir Paul a couple of times, and he had seen 8 Days a Week, our documentary about the Beatles in their touring years, and really felt good about it. And he said, I used to feel like I couldn't afford to spend too much time talking about the Beatles because it might cast a shadow over what I was trying to do, with my work, in the present moment. And he said, a couple of years ago, I just put that aside. And I just recognized that my work today stands for itself, for what it's worth. But here's this part of my life that was defining. It means a lot to me. It means a lot to other people, but it means even more to me. And I haven't been really sharing that. And it's been really liberating to be more open and feel free to talk about it. And in retrospect, there's no question that informed my decision to go ahead and write The Boys with Clint. My success as a child actor on either The Andy Griffith Show or Happy Days must not be compared to what they achieved with the Beatles and the lasting impact that band has had on popular culture. But I do understand, his ongoing ambition. I feel that. But there was a lot of wisdom in what he was saying, and I kind of even in that moment felt myself just relax a little bit. And
why do you think it was? That was?
Well, because here was somebody who still has this fire in the belly creatively. I could see it when I was interviewing him. When the interview was over, he was taking me over and playing me, tracks he just recorded. Mm-hmm. And, here he was, like, he couldn't contain himself. I mean, he'd start moving and kind of dancing and singing along with the lyrics and stopping and making changes and talking to the engineer. And I could just see how energized he was by the creativity of the moment. And so I recognized that ambition, that idea to go beyond, to keep reaching, to keep trying to come up with something else for audiences, that is an expression of yourself. So I respected that. And for him to then turn around and say, you know what else I've learned? Is that I own my past, and it takes nothing away from the present for me to talk about it and appreciate it. I was robbing myself of the appreciation. And I just recognized the wisdom of those words. And and I feel that way about talking about it. And I'm glad I came to that conclusion before writing The Boys.
So I know you love rehearsing. Somebody else that loved it quite a lot was John Wayne.
Well, yeah, the very first time that I met him, I arrived in Carson City, Nevada. I was met by the director, Don Siegel, in the hotel. And Siegel says, let's take you up and meet Duke. And, this was his last movie, The Shootist. But it was epic in every way. So we're heading toward the elevator through the hotel lobby. We walk by the gift and sundries shop, and there is the magazine stand, and right there is a TV Guide. And that week, Henry Winkler and I happened to be posing in our Happy Days costumes on the cover. And he said, oh, this is great, I'm gonna buy this and show Duke. And I was like, well, I don't know, are you sure you wanna show the Happy Days thing? I don't know. And he said, oh no, he'll love it. So he bought it, we got in the elevator, we went up, opened the door, meet John Wayne. He's giant, he doesn't have his hairpiece on though, so he's a giant bald man. And reaches out his hand, good to meet you, and it just dwarfs my hand. I mean, just I don't know how tall he was, 6'6", 6'7", but his hands were like a 7-footer. I mean, he was just huge. And it's like, I've shook hands with Shaq O'Neal. It's kind of like that.
Yeah.
And so then Don Siegel says, "Hey, look, Duke, look at this." And he hands him the TV guide. John Wayne sort of squints at it, looks at me, looks back down at it, looks at me. He says, "Ah, big shot, huh?" And I thought, oh man, I'm screwed now. But had a fine meeting. And as we started shooting, I realized we had a lot of dialogue together, where I just could see that he was fighting the lines, and I was a little nervous about it too. And I said, "You want to run lines?" And he said, "Yeah." We went to his trailer and started running the lines. And he loved it. So that became our ritual.
And people were otherwise kind of on edge or terrified of him.
People were really careful around him. And it's not that he was throwing fits and kicking over C-stands and, throwing boxes around or anything. But, they gave him space. He was the Duke.
Right.
And I just realized that other people weren't engaging with him, but he was an actor and wanted to make sure he had the scene under control. And we developed a great rapport,
And 6 months after filming wrapped, he was interested in working with you again.
We crossed paths at a AFI dinner honoring Henry Fonda. I had done a TV show with Henry Fonda, so I was invited. And I saw him and he said, "I found a book. I want to make it into a movie, and it's you and me or it's nobody." And by this time, we also kind of knew he was ill and declining. And so it was really poignant to see that he still had that drive, but also to know that he wanted to work together again, which meant a lot to me. I worked with John Wayne. I worked with Glenn Ford, Shirley Jones, Henry Fonda, briefly with Jimmy Stewart. I directed Bette Davis. There was something that I was learning early in my career from all of these people, very different personalities, and that is a respect for the audience and a respect for the medium and the process and a measure of professionalism and kind of quality control that they carry with them to their work. And so I was working with people who were, fully established superstars, had won all the Oscars they were gonna win, and yet still wanting to work. And when they showed up, it was winning time. It was time to be good. It was time to try to be great.
How much did John Wayne's wish that he had directed more stick with you?
Well, it certainly impressed me, and he was such a big star, and also at a time when actors just didn't really do that. But this really fueled my dream and my ambition.
You mentioned on the walk this morning your mentor, George Lucas.
Yeah.
Tell about auditioning for him 6 times and then the one-on-one meeting.
Everybody my age was going in for auditions on this. It was, it had a crazy title, American Graffiti. But at this point I hadn't read a script, and it was described as a musical. I went in for my first meeting, and I met George. I did say, I hear this is a musical, and I know I haven't read a script yet or anything, but I want to let you know, I know I did The Music Man, but they must have thought it was cute that I couldn't sing because I'm really not a very good singer. And he said, nobody sings, nobody has to sing. It's a musical, but nobody sings. When I finally read the script, I still didn't understand why he was calling it a musical. And later I realized he had written every scene with a specific 50s rock and roll song in mind. And the sort of the soundtrack of the movie was what made it a musical to him. But again, that's George with his lateral thinking. I mean, he's just an outlier. And everything about that project was something brand new to me. I learned so much. Kept going through this audition process. Finally, we were doing improvs. We did some scripted things. Finally, I was teamed with Cindy Williams, who sadly just passed away, and we won the role. But it was our 6th audition over a period of about 6 months. And I asked George about it later, and he said, yeah, it took me that long to find the cars, too. So again, he was looking at this thing holistically. He was creating a world. We were a part of it. But he didn't want to direct us too much. He wanted us to be very naturalistic. And I told him then that I'd been accepted to USC Film School and that I wanted to be a filmmaker. And he said, oh, great. He said, make sure you study animation, because that's pure filmmaking. Animation is pure filmmaking. And he said, you don't have to worry about the actors and things like that. And I thought, well, this is kind of a crazy thing to say to one of your actors in your one meeting before you're going to go off and shoot the movie. But George wasn't censoring himself. He was trying to be helpful.
You've said that George never quite figured out how to talk to actors. How so?
George is very result-oriented, and he has something in his head, and he counted on the actors to get it there, but he didn't think of himself as a performance whisperer. And yet you look at the performances in American Graffiti, and they're very, very cutting edge. I mean, they were so honest, and that honesty was just what that movie needed. Just as the faster, more intense direction that he gave everybody over and over again in Star Wars. That was his main direction, faster and more intense. But that was right for Star Wars. So I think more than anything, great eye for casting.
You missed that one, right? Star Wars?
I couldn't even get a damn audition for Star Wars.
But you didn't think anything of it when he first brought it up to you, right?
I was saying to George, well, do you know what you want to do next? And he said, maybe, I'm just starting to kind of write the story for it. And I said, well, what would it be? And he said, well, it would be science fiction, but it would use all the special effects and the technical breakthroughs that you could see in 2001: Space Odyssey. So I'd want to do what Kubrick did, but I wanted to be fast, and I wanted to be, full of action, kind of like Flash Gordon. And that's about all he said, and it sounded really terrible to me. Really lame. That man of vision clearly knew that I didn't fit into his vision, because I couldn't even, not only did I not to get to read the script, I couldn't even get in for an audition.
So it's the 8th season of Happy Days. You have already at this point had as much success as any child actor could possibly have. Yet you make the pretty extraordinary decision to leave the show.
Right.
To pursue directing.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, the entire time that I was under contract and doing Happy Days, my dream was to be a filmmaker. And I felt like that the clock was ticking a little bit on me. I was 26, 27, and I'd been directing for a few years. And I was just, I'd lost patience with not being able to devote all my energies to making that transition and giving that its chance. I was married already. We didn't have children yet, but starting to think about a family. And when Cheryl completely supported me turning down the what would have been a huge raise. And when I did pass, the head of television said, "Look, I just have to ask you one question. Have you done the math?" And I said, "Yeah, I've done it. But I think I have to make this move." A lot of it just came from the fact that I really wanted some guarantees from Paramount Pictures and ABC that they would allow me to direct, not Happy Days. We had a great director, Jerry Paris. I wanted to direct a feature, and I wanted them to facilitate that. And they simply would not make any kind of guarantee.
How much truth is there, really, to Opie Gets Laid?
Oh, Opie Gets Laid. Well, it's true that it went through my mind. It endured as a serious idea for probably about 2.5 to 3 seconds.
Opie Gets Laid would have probably made Ron $1 million, and he could have gone off and made a movie. But I'm glad he steered away from that, because I don't think anybody really wanted to see Opie get laid.
A lot of
of times in life, I'll think about the fact that my dad has a public profile that isn't embarrassing is massive. And if he had done Opie Gets Laid, it's just, I wouldn't be in this business.
Good joke. Great for the Letterman show.
But do you think that the fact that Paramount wouldn't make that guarantee to you, looking back, is the best thing that could have ever happened?
I was already in motion. If they had made those commitments, I would have done the show and made the movies. I might not have fallen in step with Brian, and I think I think that partnership has really been a huge defining factor in my career as a director.
Why is directing less exhausting to you than acting?
Well, acting creates a lot of insecurity. At least it does for me, because I want to be excellent, but I feel limited. I have limited tools. I always felt that. And
meaning you just didn't think you were as good of an actor as some of the other greats.
Yeah, I never felt like I could create a character and will a moment into existence the way other great actors who I've seen since can. I thought I was naturalistic. I thought I had good comedy timing. I thought I was a good soldier, but I didn't feel particularly creative acting. As soon as I began directing, I felt like this is what I'm really suited for. I'm a more creative person when I'm working behind the camera than I ever was in front of it.
I know you call yourself an actor's director. Brian, though, says, too, there is a point at which you will shut an actor down, regardless of their stature, if you are adamant in your creative vision.
I'm the keeper of the story. So if an actor isn't realizing a pivotal moment, a key moment, that's a building block toward realizing the potential of the story, then that's where I have to intervene. And
you'll do what?
It's easier now with my resume and credentials and so forth behind. But just dig in and say, we need this moment.
Does that ever still happen with big stars today?
No, I haven't. It hasn't happened in ages and ages to me. But what I've really learned to do is to approach those kinds of moments with a kind of clarity and logic. And if you can talk about acting with Amy Adams or Kate Blanchett or Tom Hanks or Russell Crowe or Glenn Close, these world-class talents, and they recognize that you understand what it's going to take for them to flourish, and you can talk about the script with a clarity and a depth, and help them align their characters with that moment. It doesn't very often come to an impasse, and when it does, you can finally play that card of, no, I just need a take that achieves this, and they know that they have to. But the other thing is that if you demonstrate over and over a leadership style which covets input, which is excited by other people's ideas, and people recognize that you're thrilled to say yes to an idea that works. Early on, I was so terrified that I was the youngest person on the set with all the responsibility, and I kind of had to I couldn't afford to ever show any weakness. I thought that meant I had to have all the answers. And when I began to recognize that I could create back and forth a creative interaction that could up my game and bring out more of the actors or great cinematographers, production designers, editors, composers, then my work got a lot better.
In film, it's a director's medium. It's his vision. You know, the writer can write beautiful words and set up a beautiful sort of story, and yet it finally is the director who is taking the material, the performances, the crew's technical expertise, and he's molding it into, you know, a vision. Ron realizes the buck finally stops with the director, and Ron has a wonderful way of getting great performances out of actors.
How did you charm Bette Davis?
She was hard to charm. That was an important step for me. Anson Williams came up with that idea for that project. It was called Skyward. It was about a paraplegic girl who dreamed of flying. And Bette Davis was going to play this sort of crusty aerobatic pilot who would eventually be her instructor and give her this opportunity to soar. And I had some disagreements with her about the character, and I was having to, you know, over the phone, sort of tell her, here's who I was going to cast, and here's how I thought the character should look, and it was some back and forth that was kind of tense, and she kept calling me Mr. Howard. And I said, well, Miss Davis, you know, just feel free to call me Ron, please. And she said, no, I will call you Mr. Howard until I decide whether I like you or not, and hung up the phone. So now I've never worked with a superstar at this point. I've worked with friends and family and people my age and peers and people who just felt lucky to have the job, you know, on the movies that I'd done up to that point. And I was tossing and turning, and it was my dad who said, you know, just don't be afraid to direct her, because she's a major talent. She's a multiple Oscar winner. She knows she needs direction. Every good actor knows they need leadership. So, you know, don't get in her way, but respect her process, but do your job. And so on that very first day, we were shooting in Texas, Plano, Texas, in August. It was like hitting 100 degrees by, you know, 8 a.m. in the morning. We were shooting out on this airfield, and I knew that William Wyler was her favorite director. Great director, but he always directed in a suit and a tie. So I showed up in a suit and a tie. And I went up to give her first direction, and she really overreacted in this big Bette Davis way. She said, oh, you startled me. I saw this child walking up to me, and I wondered, you know, what of any consequence could this child possibly have to say to me? Ha 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 ha, does the big Bette Davis laugh. All of this is loud enough for the crew to hear. And so I laughed too, and gave her the direction anyway, and walked off and was popping Tums, and just thought, oh man, this is gonna be a long one. It's gonna be a long road. And during the course of the day, we were going through the shooting, and at a certain point I had to give her a direction. She disagreed with it, but I said, well, please just try it. She said, okay, I'll try it. It was a staging adjustment or something, and she turned and moved on the line that I suggested instead of where she was, where her instincts were telling her to leave. And she did it and said, you're right. Works much better, let's shoot. So we did that. Anyway, we were going along fine during the course of the day. Now it's about 4:30 or 5, and I said, well, Miss Davis, you're finished for today. We have another scene to do, but great first day. See you tomorrow. She said, okay, Ron, see you tomorrow. And then she patted me on the ass. And I thought, well, okay, we're on the Bette Davis ride, but I'd won her over. Didn't mean that there weren't arguments and tense moments ahead, but when it was all over, she said, keep it up, you could be another Wyler. I haven't turned out to be as great as Wyler. He's in the ultra elite, but it certainly gave me a lot of confidence.
What about Jim Carrey and the contact lenses on the Grinch?
I felt like it was the Spanish Inquisition, and I was the Inquisitor. I could tell that the costume and, especially the contact lenses were just tormenting Jim. He was having panic attacks to the point where, literally he'd be breathing into a paper bag in between setups, just trying to hang on, because he felt claustrophobic in the costume. But we'd already filmed it. He wanted to wear that costume. He wanted to create that character. I tried to do things just to cheer him up, like one day I put on the Grinch suit so that I could suffer along with him, and I could let him know I could see now how miserable it really was.
Was it that bad?
Yeah, it was terrible. It was itchy. It was, and I didn't even have to have the contact lenses, which made it worse. So he appreciated that I was at least willing to suffer with him. One day I surprised him. He loved Don Knotts. Don Knotts played Barney on the Andy Griffith Show. And I hadn't seen Don in a long time. But I called Don and I said, would you come over and hang out on the set one day? Jim Carrey idolizes you and he's going through hell on this project. And so I snuck Don in and through the speaker I said, hey Jim, look over here, look at me. There's somebody down here who wants to see you. And he looked and he squinted through those contact lenses and he could see it was Don Knotts. And I wish I'd had the camera rolling because he immediately went into his Don Knotts impression. Jim's a genius impressionist. And he did a perfect Don Knotts in the Grinch costume. The whole crew was just laughing. He came down and spent an hour hanging out with Don, and it really elevated him. The thing that really ultimately helped was that Brian actually found somebody from, I think he was a Navy SEAL or an ex-CIA operative or something like that, who trained agents how to deal with torture. And this guy worked with Jim to help him develop survival techniques. And and Jim made it through. But that moment where Jim is saying, I'm done, I'll give the money back, I'll pay with interest, I just can't finish the movie. Of course I wanted to finish the movie, but I also understood the kind of agony he was going through, and whatever he had to do, he'd have to do.
Robert De Niro, you said he's not a guy who invented, he was reflective. How did that impact your future process?
Well, I directed Robert De Niro in Backdraft. I wanted to sort of recreate the whole cowboy mentality and the environment around the Chicago Fire Department, which was unique at that time in a lot of ways. Very old school. Robert De Niro came in to do a role. It was only 4 weeks of shooting. He could have phoned this in, but instead, he really doubled down on his own research as this sort of forensic fire investigator. And once we started rolling, I realized that he had met 3 different fire investigators, and now he had the body language of one of them, the speech cadence of another, and the sort of the cocky attitude of a third. And I realized that these vivid characters that he had created so memorably were not coming from his imagination. They were coming from what he could observe and learn, and then sort of meld and share through his instrument, him as an actor. It kind of blew my mind, and it taught me in a way how to research. The next film was Apollo 13, which was all about accuracy and authenticity. And slowly but surely, I just began to find real joy and creativity, ingenuity through the research, through the fact-finding, and then finding ways to use everything that I learned about drama and comedy, for that matter, to sort of present these ideas to audiences in ways that could be really, compelling and entertaining, but rich with detail.
I know you always wanted to work with Jack Nicholson. Ever get that chance?
I tried very, very hard to get Jack Nicholson to play Richard Nixon in Frost Nixon. Frank Langella had been brilliant on stage, but the studio was interested in going after bigger stars if we could. Ultimately, Frank Langella did the role and did it brilliantly. He was nominated for Best Actor. So in the end, I wouldn't change a thing. But I met with Nicholson many times and just said, I think you'd be brilliant in this. And he said, I just don't think I'm that guy. I don't think I can do that. Then he suggested we go after Warren Beatty. And we spent Brian Grazer, Peter Morgan, who wrote and also was one of the producers, and I spent a lot of time talking to Warren. Warren came close and then saw Frank's performance in New York and said, "I can't touch that. It's his. He should do it. I bow out." And both of those experiences would have been really interesting for me, but I wouldn't trade it for Langella and everything he brought to Frost Nixon.
Why do you think the relationship with Brian works?
I mean, the relationship with Brian is so paradoxical because they're very, 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 very different. But there's also an innocence that I feel with my dad that I also feel with Brian. There's like a real kind of like, I don't know if it's the ability to have a beginner's mind or something, like an excitement that both my dad and Brian share that is incredibly youthful and very energizing and has allowed them to create and create and create and create.
When I sort of found him and we began working together and found we had the kind of professional chemistry and we were friends and we could really get things done together, he was very, very clearly a solution to a problem in my mind, which was that despite the fact that I was gaining experience as a director, that I was, on a top television show, had a name in the industry going back to the 1960 with the Andy Griffith show, other movies, and American Graffiti and Music Man and other things. It was turning that corner and actually getting feature films made. Brian just had a clarity of purpose, and he was also very creative. So he wasn't just a business guy. He understood the whole process at a very young age. He knew how to get things done, and somehow the leverage that I had to offer, combined with his energy and focus and experiences, we could accomplish things. We got Night Shift made.
What do you think Night Shift did for your guys' relationship?
It was huge in building a trust and a relationship with one another. First of all, it was a successful movie, so that was good. I mean, it wasn't a big hit like Splash, but it was successful, and the machine of the movie worked really well.
I understand that him following through with directing Splash had a big impact on developing trust between the two of you as well. Why was that?
Because I promised that the studio wouldn't recut his movie. I had to get the assurance from the chairman of the board and the board itself that they wouldn't recut Ron Howard's movie. And then he felt safe to go direct this film. Otherwise he wouldn't have done it.
Tell about what you guys will do with your wives and the limo on opening night.
So we'd get in a limo and have a bottle or two of a great Bordeaux, and we'd drink the great Bordeaux as we were going through the In-N-Out Burger, and we'd go from theater to theater on a Friday night and run in and stand in the back and see how big the audience was. Was the house full? Were they reacting? Were they laughing? Were they involved? And that became a tradition for us that we did for at least 20 years.
What did you guys enjoy about it?
You enjoyed feeling that you turned nothing into something, and you turned an ether into a fully animated object,
Yeah.
And that people were, it was reaching them emotionally, and that was a big deal for us.
And we were each getting a lot done separately, but we, when we began to have conversations about, should we just align and build a company? I think we both just felt that our creative chemistry could just broaden our reach and the capacity of what we could do, and what we could earn, and the opportunities that we could offer other people too. And that continues to be sort of what supercharges Imagine.
What's something after all these years that each of you do that gets on one another's nerves?
Well, I probably do more things that could get on his nerves than he could get on mine.
Like?
Because he's not quirky like that. He's the guy that you want to hang out with for a year. And I'm the guy that you want to hang out with for 5 days. I mean, I might be much more exciting for 5 days, but you'll last a year with Ron Howard, easily.
Brian's obviously an emotional guy, but the singular point he got emotional in our conversation the other day was talking about you not getting nominated for Best Director for Apollo 13.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And it was surprising to me that even all these years later, it was still very visibly painful for him.
Wow.
Your thoughts on that?
Well, it's we root for each other,
Oh, that was the most terrible thing in his life, I think.
And could you feel that?
I felt horrible for him.
Did you?
Yeah. I mean, I feel horrible just thinking about it right now.
Oh, what about it affects you?
Because it's so sad. I mean, the movie itself got 9 Oscar nominations and was very favored to win Apollo 13. And it was just a critic's darling, and it was very successful. And how does that happen without the director? And it was just the prejudice of that, or the reason that happened. I won't identify what it is. It didn't make any sense.
My dad really identifies as a director, and he's definitely producing the movies alongside Brian. Mm-hmm. Well, he never felt like he had to take that credit. Like, he never felt like he needed a producing credit because, he really values what Brian does, and he didn't want to undermine that. And Apollo 13 was such a labor of love, and my dad in particular just really pushed himself as a leader, as an artist, as a storyteller, did things that were dangerous, did things that no one thought possible in order to make a movie that has really stood the test of time.
Right.
When the film got nominated, my dad was not one of the people nominated. So any sort of wonderful sort of yay, we did it! He technically wasn't part of that we. And I think that was a defining moment where he was like, I'm not just a director for hire. I developed these things from the beginning.
He said he shared that disappointment with his kids, because he didn't want his kids to think that everything for him works easily. So that makes me sad. That made me really sad.
Even all these years later?
Yeah.
Why do you think that still sticks with you?
I don't know. It just does.
God, what a history together. And that in and of itself is emotional and rare, so rare. And it feels good to have that trust, and also to feel safe in being emotionally vulnerable with somebody, and to know somebody is pulling in your direction. It means a lot to me, and I think it means a lot to Brian.
What did it mean to you then to see him finally win?
That blew my mind. I loved it.
Can you describe that moment?
Well, no, it was amazing because we were very, very favored to win. But we were very favored to win on Apollo 13, so we both were very anxious, even though it seemed, all the stars, moons, and planets were aligning themselves. No, it was thrilling to have him win, and then to have Tom Hanks give us the Oscar. It was amazing.
Right.
The whole thing was kind of perfect.
How close were you to getting a different director for A Beautiful Mind?
Well, there was a different director originally, and I changed directors. And then it was an open assignment, and there were a lot of directors that wanted to do it, including Ron, because he was now available. But I did want Ron to change some of his key people that were working below the line. I just thought maybe it'd be beneficial to him to just mix it up a little bit. And because he has a tendency, if he likes people, he'll work with them movie after movie after movie. And I just thought this movie was harder edge, just different. I remember saying some version of I really want you to change, I think it was, just reshuffle the deck a little bit. And he said he would, and he did.
What was it about his skill set that made you feel he was your guy for it?
Ultimately, his value system and compassion, just empathy was critical in this movie, because it was about the love between a husband and a wife that shouldn't work because he is schizophrenic, and it's just the level of tolerance on something like that is very low, and it's just about the power of love ultimately, and he's good at those themes.
Was there ever a moment where you thought, we need to part ways?
You know what? We've never assumed we were going to go on forever. But we both love the company and have kind of heart and soul committed to it. And it continues to service us. What's really changed is the company is now evolving and growing in a way that, and we recognize the excitement of creating opportunities for other people, for our executives to grow, for creatives to come in and really imagine, a place where they not to just do a project, but to sort of set up shop. And we're doing more and more of that in our sort of saying, neither of us are tired of doing what we're doing creatively, but as a business, let's get bigger. Let's create more opportunities for other people, and it suits both of us.
My dad, in a way, has had 2 marriages. He's had his marriage with Brian Grazer, and he's had his marriage with Cheryl Howard. And they both have very big personalities. He's just very enchanted by someone who is living their life with authenticity. And I think it's the strength of my mom's conviction and personality that has given my dad the courage to be who he is in the world, just to keep sticking to a good story well told.
How resistant were your parents initially to Cheryl when she started coming in the picture?
Well, outside of very early on at 16, they were concerned that I was just falling deeply in love and focusing a lot of energy.
Which you were.
Which I really was. And so they were putting a lot of restrictions. They were fairly strict anyway.
And you guys got into it a little bit over that,
yeah,
right?
We did. And I found it really frustrating. And they'd only wanted me to have I think it was 1 date a week or 2 dates a week, and I kept negotiating and pressing because I thought that was really unfair, and I just wanted to hang out, over there with Cheryl as much as I could. And so then I started going to church with Cheryl, and they said, well, church, okay, well, that's, if you want to go to church, we're not going to stop you from going to church. Then I said I was going to try out for the cross-country team. I had no real intention of doing that, but I knew that would buy me some training time. So I would jog this sort of 1.25 miles or whatever it was over to Cheryl's house and hang out with Cheryl for a while. Then she would drive me back, and then I would sort of sprint 4 or 5 blocks so that I would just come in completely exhausted and sweating like I'd had a hell of a run.
And you were pretty early with throwing around the I love yous and marriage talk, right?
I was. I felt such confidence about our love and our relationship, and just Cheryl as a person and what it brought out in me.
But way more so than she did early on.
I think so. She was pretty directed and focused on what she kind of wanted to do in her life, and she wasn't really thinking about romance much. But nor was I particularly, but I think I am a romantic.
Wait, but if that's the case, you have what might be one of the worst proposal stories in the history of proposals.
Yeah, well, I wasn't very, oh yeah. Well, I had asked Cheryl to get married a couple of times seriously, and she wanted to get further along, closer to her degree, and I was thinking about it, and now 21, but we've been together since we were 16, and asked Anson Williams, who played Potsy on Happy Days, do you think I ought to get married? He says, Howard, you've been married the whole time anyway. It's not like you're taking advantage of being on a #1 television show out there playing the field. What are you waiting for? And We were literally on the on-ramp getting onto the Ventura Freeway, and as we were turning around, I said, well, do you want to get married? Seriously, what do you think? And she said,
No
yes.
ring?
No ring,
Okay.
no prep. When I fell in love and found Cheryl, I had a sense of focus, confidence, excitement about something that had nothing to do with show business. It was this relationship and what it could mean.
Why do you think their marriage has lasted?
Well, they deeply love each other, and I think they take the commitment of marriage very serious, faithful to one another in every single way.
You got to be conscientious, and I think communication is the key. I think the one thing we've learned is how to problem solve. Marriage counseling has helped us from time to time.
She said the counselor said that in the counselor's 30 years of doing this, that you two were the most sensitive couple to tension
And conflict.
ever witnessed.
Yeah, neither of us want to be in a fight. We don't get any charge out of that. It doesn't do anything for us. It's not romantic. It's not fun. It's not cleansing.
My parents are really lucky to have each other because they met very young. They've grown up together, and they've grown up together in a way that is very in sync. Like, my parents are legitimately soulmates. We look at my parents' relationship, we look at my grandparents' relationship, and it's a remarkable model for how to live your life with integrity and love.
The advice Cheryl gave Bryce was to put the marriage before kids. That means what?
That was something that I think I brought to our relationship that I had learned from my dad and mom, which was even though Clint and I had really active careers, that we were living their life, and they had each other, and they had their dream and this marriage, and we were the children that came out of that. There's security in sort of knowing where you fit in to this unit. I
once asked my mom if she had to choose between her kids and my dad, like what she would choose, and she did not skip a beat. She was like, "Oh, I would choose your father." And my dad, he says this thing where he's always like, "You guys leave. Like, she's staying. You guys leave. So I'm gonna choose her side every single time."
I wanted to mention something that Cheryl told me. She said, "Sometimes I don't feel he understands his power or worth in a given moment." What do you think?
Brian says a similar thing to me sometimes. I have a lot of pride in what I've accomplished, and it means a lot to me. And people's respect means a lot to me. I feel that I've earned it, but there's something about this business that I cannot take that status thing all that seriously. I don't know if it's because I grew up in a household of workaday actors who didn't have that kind of status, or whether I just recognize that it's a way of life. There's a lot of showmanship. There's a lot of hype. I sort of refuse to invest too much in status or rankings or whatnot.
My dad has never been one of the cool kids. He's a really decent, earnest, sweet guy, and that's how he presents. He's also brilliant, edgy, brave. He's all these things that are usually associated with the cool kids, but because he doesn't lead with that, he seems like he might be a little simple. And because of that, I think he constantly feels like he needs to prove himself with his work. He's always pushing the medium forward, always. And yet, because he is such a humble person, and he always says we instead of I, but he's so inclusive and collaborative, he doesn't ever want to take credit for when it works. And yet, if it doesn't, he will absorb that blame.
I think that notion of what have you done for me lately is central to this business, because the dynamics of making anything good, of creatively realizing the potential of a project, it demands excellence in the moment. And experience factors into that. You know, pedigree and brand value can help in the marketing, but it doesn't help in the creation of a moment that is going to be memorable. I want to rely on my experience and trust it, and trust my own instincts, because at the end of the day, a filmmaker has to do that. But I never want that to shift over into a laziness, a kind of intellectual laziness. And
that concerns you?
That concerns me. That you can have so much experience behind you that you begin to say, well, in this situation, here's what we do: ga-bing, ga-bung, ga-boong, and then the scene's over and we got it. And you know, I have that kind of. I can be glib about that kind of creative problem solving, but I don't want to fall into that trap. And I also love engaging collaborators. So sometimes it's not really insecurity. Sometimes it's, I know what I have to offer. What do you have? What do you got? Who? You? You know, please speak up.
Yeah.
And let's elevate my game. Let's elevate our game. Because I always have my instinct to fall back on. I'm thrilled, so excited when a better idea comes along. And I think people enjoy working with me for that reason.
I think Ron has a healthy perspective on things. Mm-hmm. You know, I think Ron, you know, a little bit of doubt goes a long way. I think Ron's got a really beautiful blend of confidence and observed frigging where he is and where his place in the world. I personally wish Ron would have a little better sense of self-victory. You know, Ron is a Hall of Famer.
What makes him the Hall of Famer to you?
Ron has a tremendous consistency. You know, Ron also has not let up. He loves to tell stories. He loves to explore things and deliver that exploration to the public. You got to remember, he was Opie. And when he was 13 or 14 years old, and he was still Opie, and he wanted to do something else, and he got this idea, he got this dream to make movies, to be a director, to be a John Ford, to be a Frank Capra. The vibe out there was, are you kidding? Opie doesn't become a director, you know? And Ron fought that. Ron fought that inside and out.
Ron said the quality about himself that he most deplores is the emotional reliance for other people's approval. God. How do you see that come out in him?
Well, he's a pleaser. You know, he's making movies for big audiences. And so he wants to please the bigger part of the bell curve. You know what I mean? And in order to do that, he tests the movie every week. He'd build the engine and take the engine apart in order to make sure that he's optimizing every bit of what the intention of the movie is.
I spend a little too much time actually sort of giving a about what people think. And
in what ways?
Look, what the critics have to say about a movie or a TV show, you know, it affects the future and the viability of that on a kind of commercial level. But to get lost in that, it just dissipates your energy. And that's an old sort of mentor of mine who was this great assistant director. He said one of the great traps in life is dissipation of energy. And it can be it can come in a lot of directions. It can be, misuse of stimulants. It can be addictions of various kinds. Even overwork. It could be all kinds of things. But the real power is when you focus your energy and you apply your purest energy to what it is you're trying to do, whatever that might be. And so I do kind of kick myself when I allow those insecurities that in a way fuel my drive, continue to fuel my ambition. You know, if it begins to cloud my thinking too much, then it's in the way, and it's not fuel anymore. It's creating a barrier.
Clint spoke openly about how, you know, he went through a tough time back in the day with drugs and alcohol.
Well, boy, that was a difficult, heartbreaking time and thing to witness, and it was terrifying, and I wasn't sure Clint was gonna make it out, and
Really?
I don't think Mom and Dad were sure he was gonna make it out.
When the point for you that you were most concerned was what?
There was a point where he was delusional and having kind of episodes that were drug related, but brushes with the law and flirting with kind of homelessness, and and it was unsustainable. And he'd been through rehab a couple of times unsuccessfully, and looked like it was just getting worse. But at a certain point, Clint found the will himself to live, and Dad really helped him turn that corner once Clint decided. I think Dad did his very best parenting when Clint was 30 years old and in a lot of trouble, and he found ways to sort of give him just enough money to live on and just enough space to feel autonomous, but with a lot of supervision.
Because he'd taken away the key to the house.
Yeah, Clint couldn't come to their house. It was tough love. It was tough love.
Why did you say you, in part, blame yourself?
I had been really strictly controlled as a kid. My parents must have been worried about kidnapping and other things. They were really helicopter parents with me, and I chafed under that, resented it. Clint came along, was such an extrovert, and so popular, so smart, funny, great actor, but also really good athlete. And just, socially, I could see that he had a lot of the qualities that I sort of wish I had. And a lot of the friendships and social interaction and things that I kind of yearned for, but didn't even know how to have. And so I pushed Mom and Dad to give him more freedom and more flexibility. And even when Clint was starting to smoke pot and things like that, I wasn't using any drugs, but I had really good friends who were highly functional and socially responsible about it, and I said, this is not a nightmare. These are changing times. Relax. So, in their earliest stages, when they might have been able to do something, I think I was a voice, kind of telling them to back off as parents, and so those are regrets that I have.
Ron said he in part blames himself for what you went through.
Well, that's a nice thought, but I kind of call bullshit on that. I mean, listen, I don't know. What's a big brother gonna do? What's a guy? I mean, I love Ron, and I kind of knew what he was thinking. Ron and I went to a Super Bowl.
Super Bowl 14.
I guess it was. There was the Steelers and the Rams at the Rose Bowl, and he gave me the speech about because he had been around a lot of young actors that getting loaded or high or whatever. And he goes, it's one thing when you use drugs, but it's another thing when drugs start using you. And the one problem with Ron is this his talks were a little cliche.
Yeah.
But if he would have played it different, I may have fully rejected it. I mean, Ron and I were always really close. Ron is a Hall of Fame movie director. He's a better Big Brother. He still is a better Big Brother.
One of the last really challenging acting roles that I took on was a movie called Act of Love. It was based on a true story. A younger brother had euthanized his older brother as requested after a horrible accident where the brother was going to be, paralyzed forever, and younger brother shot him. And there was a trial. And there was a moment on the witness stand where I'm supposed to talk about how much I love my brother, and of course, in my mind, reliving this horrible incident. And I just sort of stayed in the zone because what I was thinking about was, how much pain I was feeling about my brother. And the question in my mind was whether Clint would survive and what it would be like to lose him. And how much I loved him. And I was just able to personalize it. And in that take, it was really emotional, and those were real, real tears.
You mentioned a moment ago kidnapping, right. And that brings me to Ransom, inspired in part by real life events involving you.
Yeah.
Explain in what way.
The story wasn't inspired by our experiences. It was a remake of something that had been an hour television drama and then been made into a movie starring Glenn Ford, and had a great hook where the father whose son has been kidnapped, basically says, I'm not going to pay you ransom. I'm putting out a bounty on you, basically, and it was. Every version of that story, that was a powerful moment. Mel Gibson played it brilliantly in our movie version. But
Bryce says she thinks in part your way of dealing with what you guys went through was doing that movie.
When I read that script, Brian had found it, brought it to me. I had been looking for a project about kidnapping because we'd been through this horrible experience where our home had been targeted, and it was unclear as to what the criminal objectives were, but it was not good. But the police had gotten wind of it, and we had stakeouts at our home, and it was very traumatic, but thank God no crimes were committed. And but just the pressure of anticipating that possibility, I found fascinating. And in my own, again, ongoing quest to understand all sides of every issue that people experience and go through, I kept wondering what was going through those kidnappers' heads. Mm-hmm. What were they thinking? Why? And of course, I had no answers. But the question was there. Well, this script, Ransom, sort of answered some of those questions, or at least posited a possibility. So I projected all that emotion and anxiety and kind of empathy that I had for that crisis, that situation, and poured it into that story. And it's the only time I've really wanted to do a crime story, because I don't want to celebrate crime, and I don't necessarily find it cool or intriguing, but this was emotional and raw and personal for me, and it was so I was able to project that anxiety and that my sense of that experience and what it might have been like had something actually happened.
Growing up, we had some security issues it was super scary, and we had to leave our house, and there were incidents that were just totally terrifying.
The scariest part of all of that for you was what?
I think the scariest part for me was that because I was the oldest child, I was aware something was going on. And it was like, why can't I call my friends? And, you know, they don't want to explain to me because like freaking phones are tapped, trying to find where we are.
How did you find out your phones had been tapped?
You know, it was research that just came through the police department. Ultimately, the FBI became involved, and then, you know, there were vehicles observed in our area that, you know, that very well, you know, fit the description of some of the people that they thought might be involved, and we just picked up the family and left.
My mom had a couple of medical things that happened at that time where she had to go to the hospital for panic attacks. And the weirdest memory was during the LA riots, because it was all happening around that time, and a bunch of folks showed up at our house, and who were, I later found out, like either part of like the FBI or like, you know, some protective measure. And like I saw like their firearms, I saw the, you know, hushed conversations. And I remember the stress that my parents were under. And then my dad kind of worked through it in effect with Ransom.
I understand some of those scenes in that film, because of what he'd gone through, were extra hard for him. Did you guys ever have conversations?
I remember, of course, talking about it in the script stage. We'd talk about it then, that he was able to relate to it really well. And it's sort of the premise of the movie, you know. And the movie is basically, even though it's played by Mel Gibson, he's playing relatively average guy. He doesn't have superpowers at all. You know, he's just a dad executive husband, you know. And but when he got pushed into a corner, he took the most aggressive position. And that's probably what Ron would do. So it was, a lot of it was like a way for Ron, you know, it was probably very therapeutic for him, because that is how he plays the game of life.
What do you mean?
He is extremely collaborative until he feels pushed in a corner. If he feels sure that his artistic vision is being threatened, he won't allow that to happen.
What does he do in those situations?
He'll assert all of his energy and power to defeat that.
Was there a moment during that process where you could breathe a sigh of relief, where you just knew this is over, we're good?
The reality is, once you've felt that vulnerability, I think you're forever on your guard. You go on and you figure out ways to live with it, but you can't forget about it.
The kids front, why was your biggest fear going into that, wondering if you could measure up to your dad?
Oh, well, I think my father was a kind of a genius level parent. You know, Dad really had a knack for it, but he also had time to commit. And I have always had a burning ambition, a career that meant a lot to me, that's incredibly demanding. Cheryl's always been supportive of that. And I knew that's a very different factor. So as a parent, you know, I really wanted to feel that I could live up to, you know, the kind of parenting that I received. My career does demand a certain modicum of selfishness. I mean, you have to be ready to move your family around. You have to be ready to say, you know, we have to work with this. This is my life.
Why was it so important to Cheryl to move the family out of LA?
We could just see that that LA could be pretty constricting, emotionally reductive. You know, we were hearing stories about kindergarten kids being taunted by other kindergarten kids saying, "My dad's hotter than your dad."
Apparently, one day, someone, when I was at preschool, they gave me a script to bring home to my dad. I think assuming that maybe then my dad would read it and somehow turn around and be like, yes, this is the movie I'm doing. Didn't quite have that effect. I think my parents realized that being raised in Los Angeles, so much of the culture of this city is centered around the entertainment industry. And they sort of didn't want to raise us in an environment that felt that singular.
Cheryl did not want the kids subjected to that on a regular basis. And she really began to feel passionate about that, particularly as I also started building a company, but it was a big leap, and it meant a lot of travel time for me. The year we launched Imagine was the year I actually moved out of LA.
I was very surprised because I just assumed he'd live in LA because he'd spent his whole life in LA for the most part. And that's where Hollywood is.
Right.
So,
I mean, were you concerned?
maybe. I think I was just missed him, actually.
What was that adjustment process like?
I couldn't imagine him not being, in the same location where I could just walk into his office or he could walk into mine and we'd just hang out or walk around the lot. We always had a thing about walking around the lot and talking through our fantasies,
Brian was always trying to get me to move back.
Was he?
Oh, he'd say, we had a horrible earthquake. And he said, property prices are really going to crash now that we've had this earthquake. This might be the time for you to buy, Ron. And what do you think? Come on back.
Was that devastating to you at the time?
No. It was actually, I felt like in Los Angeles, like my memories are they're very limited. They're like of the living room, the park. It wasn't, because my parents were protective, they weren't bringing me to premieres or anything like that. And when we moved out to the East Coast, I was in nature, and I grew up on a farm, which was like not really a farm. It was just some land with a lot of pets.
And then there were chores. Like, give me a little color, if you don't mind, into like that dynamic.
So my mom in particular was very, very, very focused on creating a childhood that wasn't a reflection of the privilege that I was being raised in. That's something that she thought was very important for kids, was to do a lot of physical labor, not for their own means, physical labor in service.
And what was that physical labor for you?
I mean, specifically, I'm sure my mom told you about this, mucking out the goat barn. Did you talk about that? Mucking out the goat barn?
She only mentioned it in like passing.
Yeah. Mucking out the goat barn. I spent a large part of my weekends raking, feces, animal feces with hay and making sure that it was taken out of their pen.
Yeah, Cheryl was very focused on trying to somehow imbue the kids with an understanding of real value. Cheryl was raised without a lot of means. My parents, came from a farm in a small town, were very frugal. And so, we weren't living a big lavish lifestyle ourselves, but we did have a great home and some people working for us. But that didn't mean that the kids didn't have to make their own bed.
The impact you think that had on you guys, though, was what?
My mom was really strict, and she was strict for good reason. Like, my parents weren't going to give us their money. Like, they don't believe in that. And so they knew that when we were 18, we were going to need to take care of ourselves.
All of Ron's kids are a great example of their union. But Bryce is a wonderful example. I had an opportunity to be directed by Bryce in a Lifetime movie a few years ago, and I was on the set watching Bryce direct, and the way that she dealt with the actors so mirrored what I had witnessed with Ron for all these years. It was phenomenal. I went home that night and I called Ron and I said, Ron, you got to be really proud, because your daughter is a wonderful director, and she's very, not just courteous, but she brings the crew together and she gets everybody going in the right direction.
I definitely showed interest in storytelling and writing and directing and acting at a very young age. I got no greater joy out of anything than being on set. And so my mom really wisely realized that the most effective punishment was to ground me from set. And she only had to do it once. My dad was doing Far and Away, and I lost it. And I was like, you are ruining my life. Like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. You can't take that away from me. I got to experience so many things that were just, I mean, kind of mind-blowing and really defined me as a person. I mean, falling asleep on my dad's lap at dinner with George Lucas and Kurosawa. I always got to go and sit in with my dad during dailies. I don't think he realized that I was kind of like a computer sort of taking everything in, and how much that would mean to me and how much that would kind of add up over time. He would tell me the stories of his movies or movies that he was developing or thinking of doing when he would drive me to school to see how it would land. And I mean, that's really cool. Like, that's very cool.
Right.
That's a fun childhood.
Raising them that way, you think worked out how?
I'm really proud of them and sort of who they are, the way they live. They're very principled. They're creative. They're engaged. They're good problem solvers. So I'm really proud of them.
Thank you very much,
And
Ron.
take care.
Was there anything I did not ask that
Oh my
you would
gosh,
like?
no.
I'm sorry.